Hello, I'm Ed Fuquay, young adult librarian extraordinaire here at Woonsocket Harris Public Library.
Solitaire Frisbee from the children's room.
Here for another conversations. We're still like waist deep in Norse mythology. Now today we're doing something that's one of my favorite pieces in a lot of ways.
Okay.
But it's also kind of a problematic piece.
Well, because it involves Loki.
Yeah,
right?
it's another Loki story. This is the Lokasanna. This one comes with a content warning. It's got some sexual content. It's got some violence. It's a Viking story, basically.
Okay.
Lokasanna is also known as the flighting of Loki. Fly is how it's spelled in English. Flighting of Loki. A flighting was a traditional insult battle that Vikings would do with each other, apparently.
A rap battle?
Yes, the Vikings had rap battles. Completely, that is absolutely true.
Wow.
We don't know all the details of them, but it was a thing that's mentioned more than once. In Rick Riordan's Ship of the Dead, Magnus Chase has to engage in one of these to defeat an opponent. Also, apparently, although I haven't played it yet, in Assassin's Creed Valhalla, your character can engage in insult duels with other characters.
Okay, I have that game. I can confirm that for you.
Yeah, so that is something they actually did. It was a rap battle. Basically, it's a battle of insults, usually in rhyme. Though the version I'm borrowing from is not from the Poetic Edda, so these particular ones aren't in rhyme.
Wow.
Lokasanna is what it's called. Senna comes from the same root word as meaning truth. So I've heard this called Loki's truth-telling. Although many anthropologists believe that what Loki says isn't so much the truth as it is Loki completely trash-talking every god in the room. It's also been called Loki ruins a good party. As only he can. So this is one. I had the Kevin Crosley Holland book out because Neil Gaiman doesn't even begin to cover this.
Well, we talked last week about how he was just like the epitome of the end of the world.
Yeah.
But you kind of came to terms with that because it didn't necessarily mean that he was bad. And when you have to live that kind of existence, I feel like you just eventually roll with it.
Yeah.
That's what we get.
We don't know what it's like to have a prophecy that you're going to do something horrible and destroy the earth.
Yeah.
And you have to live with that.
Yeah.
So basically, the Lokasanna is again a rap battle between Loki and the other gods and goddesses. There's a large party being held. It's not being held at Odin's place. It's one of the other gods. All the major gods are there, including a few gods who pop up in here that don't appear in any other myth. So we don't know anything about them, really. However, Thor is not there. Thor is out killing giants. So every important god is there except Thor. In one version of the story, it opens with Loki murdering a servant, because he said the servant was bad-talking his master. So Loki just up and murders a guy for no real reason, which gets everybody really upset. Then nevertheless, immediately after that, they have a gathering in this big meat hall, and of course Loki comes striding in demanding to be served. So Odin is there with Frigga, his wife, and Odin says, you don't want any trouble. Loki is a nice, peaceful gathering. There's no need for you to show up. And Loki says, but when you made me your blood brother, you swore that we would always share food and drink together, didn't you? And Loki's like, yeah, I did say that, didn't I? All right.
When Odin made him?
When Odin made Loki his blood brother, that he swore that they would always share food and drink.
I thought Thor would have been his blood brother.
According to mythology, no.
Or does blood brother just mean he's one of the gods?
It could be symbolic. It could just be symbolic. There's also the feeling that Loki was elevated to godhood when he accepted the blood bond from Odin.
Right.
Instead of being just a giant. In any event, the gods are bound by ceremony. And so because he had made that oath, he has to let Loki come to the party.
Okay.
So Odin naturally warns him, we don't want any any trouble from you. And so Loki promises, how could I possibly, affect a gathering like this? Ruled over by such a magnificent ruler like Odin. And then he starts laying on the charges that Odin, travels the earth disguised as a woman and practices womanly magic. Which I mentioned before, that Odin's spells were thought of as being unmanly.
Right.
So Loki just drops that right in the middle of the conversation and calls him unmanly in front of everyone. And again, by the laws of hospitality, no one can just pull out a sword and stab Loki, because that would just be wrong. You've established a party and you've accepted Loki into the party. If he had kicked the door down or something, then they could stab him. But since Odin said he could join them, then he was a guest and he's protected under the rules of hospitality. So Odin is basically fuming, and his wife Frigga says, "Oh, calm down, dear." And she says, "We all want to enjoy ourselves and have a good time." And Loki basically says, "Well, thank you. You know, and that's what I expect from someone with such a loving nature. Why, I remember when Odin was gone for so long, you were with both his brothers, Vili and V." And so Odin kind of looks at Frigga, and Frigga kind of looks sideways at Odin and says, "Well, it was a very long hunting trip, dear." He looks at Loki and says, "Oh, and besides, you were with a horse." So Loki immediately drops that topic. And now Bragi is there. Again, a guy we don't know very much about. Loki immediately accuses him of cowardice. He refers to him as the pride of the bench in one translation. I'm not sure if Vikings really had benches, but whenever arrows are flying, Bragi is never to be seen. So Bragi again gets really angry, starts to draw out his sword, but he can't. So his wife is Idun, who's in charge of the golden apples of Asgard. And she calms everyone down, and Loki, accepts her calming nature and says, well, exactly the same way that you lay with your brother's murderer. And she's, of course, pretty horrified by this, but there's not much she can say except repeating what Frigga had already said about, Loki and a horse. So, Freya cuts down on everything and says, no, we must not quarrel. We're the gods. We have to set an example for people. And Loki's, an example from Freya? I mean, as the way that you've been with every god and elf in Asgard, including your own brother? And Freya basically kind of drums her fingers on the table and says, goddess of love, what exactly is your point? Well, Loki's point is that when Freya had something she really wanted, Brisingmen was the most beautiful necklace in the world. He says that you slept with 4 dwarves to get that necklace. Now, this one is probably completely true, because we have that in other myths that she did this. Brisingmen was a gorgeous necklace. It was also an extremely powerful magical artifact, and Freya had to have it. And the only thing that the 4 dwarves would accept was Freya's company, one night with each of them. So we don't know exactly what happened. Now, there was a theory that when she saw the necklace, it had not been fully forged yet. It was still being heated and reworked. And she actually became obsessed with it at that point before it was finished. And that spending their time with Freya gave them the energy that they needed. So it's possible this is a magic necklace powered by Freya's pure carnal energy. It's definitely a potent magic item. Once when Odin wanted to force Freya to do something, he stole it, but only give it back if she did what he wanted. So that's how important the necklace is. However, what Freya did was so very close to prostitution that it makes her look bad in the eyes of the other gods. It's a double standard, by far. And Freya basically says, yes, well, you slept with a horse. So Loki immediately changes topic. No more about that. Now, also in the room is Tyr. Now, Tyr and Loki have a complicated history. But does that stop Loki? Oh, no, it does not. So he mentions that Tyr, who was once greatest of gods, of course now, I think the exact phrase used, makes no woman weep, not even his lovely wife, ever since he had his terrible accident. Now, Tyr's accident was no accident. Remember I mentioned last time that Loki had several monstrous children by Jarn Saxa, the giantess? One of his children was a giant wolf named Fenris, the Fenris wolf. Now, Fenris had gone on a rampage. And Odin knew that at the end of time at Ragnarok, Fenris is going to lay waste to everything. He's one of the monsters that has to be killed at Ragnarok. But they wanted to stop that from happening for as long as possible. They had to find some way to bind the Fenris wolf. Now they went to the dwarves, as the gods tend to do, and had this magical chain built that was so fine and so powerful that it could never be snapped. And so they wanted to test out by putting it around Fenris's neck. And he boasted he could snap any chain in the world. He could toss chains around his neck, and he'd snap every one of them like they were mere threads. So they brought in one last chain, but Fenris was starting to get kind of suspicious at this point, being a child of Loki. So Fenris says, because he could talk, I will only allow you to put that one around my neck if one of the gods places his hand in my mouth. And so Tyr, who was god of war, volunteered and boldly placed his hand literally in the jaws of the wolf. And sure enough, when Fenris tensed his muscles and couldn't get free, he realized he was trapped. So he immediately clamped down, biting off Tyr's hand. In the comic books, Tyr gets a really cool mace to take the pace of his hand, and he can probably detach it and add other weapons on. But in Norse mythology, he just has one hand from that point on.
I thought you made a reference to him losing a different body part.
Well, that's the thing, is that Loki is heavily implying that having lost one body part, now the other body parts don't function as well as they should. He's pretty much stating it outright.
By a wolf.
Yeah.
Gosh.
From his own son. Loki's own son did this, and yet he still gets to mock Tyr for it. And then he immediately adds, and if thy wife happened to have a son by me, well, is it my fault that she was so in want and need? Yeah.
Did he actually?
Loki says that, yeah.
No, not did he say it. Did he?
That's the part we don't know. We know that Tyr lost his hand. Whether Loki actually fathered a child with Tyr's wife, we do not know. This is the only story in which it's alluded to. Several of the things Loki says are only alluded to in this story, which is why some people think it's just trash talk, that it's not true.
Has anything else that he said not had the shimmer of truth somewhere?
It's usually truth somewhere.
So that kind of implies...
It could be. It could very well be. And so naturally there's more of an uproar and a tumult. Everybody's getting more and more angry. And finally Tyr's wife tries to calm everyone down, denying the whole thing, of course. But she does bring up the thing about Loki and the horse. Now, at this point, when things just start to get out of hand, Thor shows up. And in this story, he actually threatens to strike Loki's head from his body with a single blow of his hammer. And so Loki is forced to retreat and leave. But by this point, if you're like most audiences, you're probably wondering about the horse.
Listen, this is Jerry Springer on a whole new level. I didn't realize Jerry Springer was not the original. No, this is pretty amazing stuff. So yeah, Loki and the horse. All right. Now this happened in the early days of Asgard. Asgard had just been built, beautiful, shining city, at least when Jack Kirby draws it. However, they had no protection. When giants attacked, they had to fight them off basically by hand. And so Odin says, we need a wall to protect Asgard. So as this was going on, a giant wanders past with his horse. And the giant says, well, I can build a wall around Asgard. So I can build a wall in 3 years around the entire city, so high and so wide that no giant could possibly breach it. And so Odin says, well, what will you take in return for this? And the giant says, well, I like the sun, and the moon, and I like Freya's hand in marriage. And the gods all went, what? Freya's hand in marriage? I mean, the sun and the moon, yeah, we could do without those, but we like Freya. She was very popular. So the gods all had this confab, and they're like, yeah, he's asking way too much, even assuming he can do it. And Loki's there and says, Loki says the worst thing he could possibly say. I have an idea. We can get it out of him for nothing. And they're like, okay, let's hear this. And so Loki lays out his plan, his cunning plan. All right, so, sure, we'll let him build the wall. He doesn't get 3 years, he gets 1.
1 year, and he has to do it all by himself. Now, he won't get the entire thing done in a year, obviously, but when he fails, we'll just have Thor kill him. And they're all like, sounds like a good plan. We'll get at least part of the wall done for free. And at this point, now this isn't in the original myth, but I'm imagining Freya is like kind of like tapping her foot on the ground. Like, wait a minute. When I use my charms to get a really potent and powerful necklace, it's bad. But then you barter me to a giant to get your wall built, and that's just good business? Yeah, real double standard here.
I think so.
This was neither the first nor the last time that Freya's hand in marriage would be used to try to make some kind of bargain with various giants and trolls and creatures like that. I imagine she got very tired of it. If it was her choice, that would be different. But so Odin goes to him and lays out the terms. Yes, 1 year to build your wall, all by yourself. And the giant says, well, I'll need my horse helping me. And they all say, well, yeah, of course, you need the horse. And they go through the details, how high it's going to be, how wide it's going to be, and the original myth goes into great detail about how big it's going to be. It'll surround the entire city, completely invulnerable. And so the next morning, the gods are eagerly anticipating watching this guy go to work. So the giant shows up, he's got his horse with him, and he has a empty sledge to drag stones with. He drapes it around the horse's neck and then smacks the horse in the rear, and the horse just boom vanishes. The horse has super speed. It's gone. And then an hour later it comes back full of rock, and the rock, mind you, has already been cut into stones. The horse was able to somehow break each rock off into actual blocks. So all the giant has to do is pick up the rocks, the stones, and put them into the wall, and pick up another one, put it right next to there, and so forth and so on. So they're watching this, and Freya goes, man, that horse is dynamite. So the horse goes back, gets another sledge full of stones, comes back, and the giant keeps going and keeps going. So weeks and months start to pass, and the wall's looking pretty good. It's getting bigger and bigger. And Freya's getting more and more anxious.
I would think.
Yeah. So it becomes obvious that as time goes on, this mighty stallion of his is bringing in so many rocks every day, the giant is easily going to be able to complete his task within the allotted time. So basically, Freya says, Loki, if you think I'm going through with this, you're crazy. And Thor says, well, I can hit him with my hammer. Odin says, no, we made a bargain. We have sworn an oath, and we have to hold up our end of the compact. So Loki says, relax. I've got it covered. Trust me. So Loki knows that the only way that the problem isn't stopping the giant. It's stopping the horse. So Loki goes out the next morning, creeps into the woods, and uses his shape-shifting powers to become a beautiful female horse. A gorgeous mare. Lovely mane, beautiful hooves, flat teeth. So when the giant sends the horse off with his sledge to fill it up with rocks, who's standing by the side of the trail but Loki himself? And he's kind of paws the ground seductively and then shakes his hindquarters to get the horse's attention. And he gets the horse's attention all right. So the giant's sitting there waiting for his rocks to come back, and he's waiting and he's waiting. And sun goes down, no rocks, no horse. So a couple more days pass, and eventually the horse comes back. He's finally dragging some rocks. By that time, the time is up. The last few stones haven't been put in yet, and the time is up. And so Odin and Thor and the rest of the gods come out, and they kill the giant for failing his task.
Oh, gosh.
Because once he had failed, of course, their bond not to kill him is gone.
Right.
Because the deal was broken. He was just a giant messing around with Asgard. And so they had no trouble putting in the last stones to complete the wall of Asgard. But a couple of months later, who should come back wandering into Asgard but Loki with a foal, a baby horse. So he comes into Odin's throne room and says, my liege, I present to you Sleipnir. And the horse, it turns out, has 8 legs. and it has the same like super speed as his father did. So he gives it to Odin, and the horse grows up to become like Odin's war mount. And you see pictures of Odin, he's often riding that like 8-legged horse. So Loki always finds some way to twist things in his favor, saving them from the complete disaster that he himself started. And after doing that, he still makes fun of Odin for being womanly, of course, because, yeah.
He gave birth.
He gave birth to a horse.
He was pregnant.
Yes, he got pregnant and gave birth to a horse after seducing the magic horse of the giant.
He could have collected from Walt Disney.
Yeah, it's
I'm at a loss. Like this was a lot.
It's a lot to take in. The Norse gods. Someone once asked an editor at Marvel Comics the biggest difference between the Loki of Norse mythology and the Loki of Marvel Comics, and the editor immediately shot back, well, our Loki has never slept with a horse. So do not expect Tom Hiddleston to recreate this in any future films or TV productions.
I'm not sure what I can say. There's not enough filters.
Yeah.
So
Norse mythology, yeah.
Okay. Are there other stories of similar?
A couple of them. That's by far the most outrageous.
Okay.
And Loki gets in several digs at the other gods, and the only one they ever come after him for, despite all the things that he's done, is, the horse story.
Okay.
Yeah. And at the time it was written, of course, they didn't include that because they assumed everybody who was reading the flighting of Loki has already, heard the story of the building of Asgard's walls.
Again, I mean, when you're living with that kind of burden, maybe life just becomes a joke.
We'll see. We'll see next week, in fact. We will start covering Ragnarok, which will be a darker story, not necessarily a better one by any stretch of the imagination.
Okay. All right. Is it also going to leave me speechless?
I don't know. It might. Not like this one did, that's for sure.
Okay.
All right, that's all there is to say. All right, so until next time, this has been Conversations. I've been Ed.
Solitaire.
We'll see you next time, and be safe.